Welcome back to 15 Lanes Talk, Game Week 30 preview show. Another week with a lot of high-stakes games starting from the title race, top 4 and relegation battle. We are going to talk about all the games that will be taking place all over the weekend, as Chelsea will be hosting Newcastle at the Stamford Bridge. Arsenal will be welcoming Everton at the Emirates Stadium. Manchester City will be traveling to London Stadium to face West Ham United. Manchester United will be taking on Aston Villa, and Liverpool will be welcoming Tottenham Hotspurs at the Anfield. Let's go! Chelsea versus Newcastle United at the Stamford Bridge. Some of the biggest talking points going into this game. Both teams played in the Champions League in midweek, and Chelsea lost to PSG heavily and Newcastle was held by Barcelona. But on the other hand, they are the only two English Premier League teams that played like really nice football, or that tried to perform but failed to get what they deserved. You understand? Chelsea ended up losing and Newcastle ended up being held by Barcelona. You understand? This is also a high-stake game, as I told you. Chelsea wants to get Europe next season, and Newcastle also is fighting very hard to see they come back in Europe next season. You understand? Newcastle right now is 12th on the league table with 39 points, and Brentford have 44 points, who are 7th. You understand? So this is a game that this is one of those games Newcastle has to prioritize. Even Chelsea has to prioritize, because there is a chance if Newcastle prioritizes this game, which means it has to sacrifice the Barcelona game. You understand? If Chelsea prioritizes this game, it has to sacrifice the comeback against PSG. So it's a game of priorities. Both teams have to see they sacrifice something to get points. Since now we are left with 8 games to go, everything is taking shape. You understand? On the other hand, are we going to see João Pedro also show up in this game? You know, João Pedro, since Liam Rafinha took over Chelsea, he has been firing in the Premier League. Even though he did not fire in the Champions League, but he always fires in the Premier League. The defense and goalkeepers have costed them this season. You understand? Chelsea maybe would be in the title race, but most of the losses have been happening because of the goalkeepers and the defense. You understand? We saw it in Champions League where the keeper gave out 2 goals to PSG, 3 goals. You understand? And we have been seeing this week in, week out, even though they dropped Robert Sanchez. And also Chelsea's defense has been struggling of late. You understand? So is Newcastle going to take advantage of this to exploit the Chelsea's defense, as they have to prioritize between Chelsea and Barcelona, since they also want to get Europe next season? They are not very far away from getting Europe. Arsenal versus Everton at the Emirates Stadium. Some of the biggest talking points going into this game. This game is one of the most important games in the history of Arsenal. You understand? And this is their last Premier League game until 11th April. So they don't have to make any mistake. They don't have to risk or make any mistake of dropping points, because they have a chance to extend their lead to 10 points and put pressure on Manchester City, who will be playing on Sunday. You understand? But if we go on the other hand, we saw Arsenal's last 2 games. We have seen they have not performed. Against Mansfield, there was a heavy squad rotation against Mansfield in FA, but they struggled against Mansfield. And we saw it against Bayer Leverkusen in Champions League. There was also another heavy squad rotation, but Arsenal never showed up. And they are going now to face Everton, who also have a European dream. David Moyes has to take them to Europe. You understand? And if you go back and check stats, Everton haven't lost a single. They are still unbeaten in their last 6 away Premier League games. Last 6 away Premier League games, Everton are still unbeaten. You understand? So, are we going to see Arsenal get the points against Everton to extend their lead and also end their unbeaten run? As we have all seen, Arsenal has not been performing to the standards. You understand? West Ham versus Manchester City. Some of the biggest talking points going into this game. Relegation battle versus title race. You understand? We also Manchester City losing heavily to Real Madrid in the Champions League away. And now they are coming also, they are traveling to London to face West Ham, another away game, which is also a game which is a game of high stakes. You understand? Because Manchester City right now they need to get back to their winning ways. Remember their last Premier League game when they faced Nottingham Forest, they made a draw. So they need to get that quick reaction to see that they keep pressure on Arsenal. They can't risk to drop points again. You understand? But this game, as I'm saying, it's a very high stake game. West Ham are struggling to West Ham are they are in the relegation battle, so every point, every game counts, every point matters. Yeah, things bad for Manchester City. Pep Guardiola won't be on the touchline. Remember, he was banned in that FA game when Manchester City was taking on Newcastle. Pep Guardiola was banned for 2 games. You understand? So, which means this game may also be hard for Manchester City. You understand? It's not going to be an easy game since it has relegation battle involved and title race. It's going to be a very, very entertaining game. And drought, you know, Haaland has been on the drought. He hasn't scored a goal in open play like for a month now. You understand? All the goals he has scored, like in this year, he has maybe scored like 3 goals, and most of them have been penalties. So he's still on that drought. And right now, as we are saying, this game is a high-stake game. Manchester City don't need to make any mistake right now. You understand? Because Arsenal will be playing Everton on Saturday. So which means if Arsenal beat Everton, they'll be 10 points clear, and the pressure will be on Manchester City. So Manchester City will be like, we don't need to make any mistake. You understand? And there's also priorities here, because since they lost to Madrid, are we going to see them change their priorities, or are they going to go full gas on this one? And remember also, next week they'll be taking on Arsenal in the Carabao Cup final. So the fixtures are tight for Manchester City. Everything is at stake here. Manchester United versus Aston Villa at the Old Trafford. Some of the biggest talking points going into this game. This is a top 4 race. Both teams are on the same points, just separated by the goal difference. You understand? So the dust must be settled in this game. You understand? Both teams we know Aston Villa has lost back-to-back games in the Premier League, and it was away in the Europa League where they beat Lille. You understand? So Manchester United, on the other hand, has been resting like for 2 weeks. They never played FA. They have been just resting. You understand? So that has to be an advantage for them to take into this game. Aston Villa was away at Lille. They have to travel back to England, and they will be traveling to Manchester United. All that fatigue on the way may cost them this game. You understand? On the other hand, as I've said, Michael Carrick lost his first game as a Manchester United interim manager against Newcastle. So he needs that reaction to get back to their winning ways. You understand? But also, as I said, Emery has lost back-to-back games in the Premier League. Both teams are going for the top 4, and both teams want to be in Europe. So we are going to see how everything is going to unfold in this game. Liverpool versus Spurs at the Anfield. Some of the biggest talking points in this game. Top 4 versus relegation battle. You understand? Both teams played in midweek in Champions League, and all teams lost. You understand? So they also need a reaction to get back to their winning ways and also pick some momentum. You understand? And Tottenham Spurs are still looking for their first win in the Premier League in 2026, or their first win in 2026. They haven't won any game, not in any single competitions. Are they going to get their first win at Anfield? And remember, the last time they won at Anfield was in 2011. So it has been over a decade. No win for Tottenham at the Anfield. You understand? And Liverpool has been dominating this fixture. We all know Liverpool has been struggling here and there. They have not been in their flow state. This season, they have struggled really, really a lot with injuries, blah, blah. You understand? But on the other hand, Liverpool also sees a chance to close the gap Liverpool also sees a chance to close the gap on Manchester United and Aston Villa. Since Manchester United and Aston Villa will be taking on one another, which means one team will drop points. One team will draw points or both teams will draw points if the game ends in the draw. You understand? So it will give Liverpool an advantage to close that gap on points since it's also fighting to get top four. You understand? And as we see the way English Premier League teams are performing in Europe, maybe Champions League next season may take away that fifth spot. You understand? This season we saw they had the fifth spot, and also Spurs that won Europa got a chance to play in the Champions League to make six English teams in the Premier League. So if next week comes and all English Premier League teams get knocked out of Champions League, they may take away the fifth spot.